Hey, it's Mark Robideau. Welcome to another VFR challenge. As always, we'll walk you through one of our VFR Mastery scenarios, give you a chance to make a critical flight planning decision, then compare your choice with our instructors. This time, our pilot is making a 650 nautical mile cross-country flight for a ski trip in the mountains of Wyoming. About halfway there, at their only planned fuel stop, they're met with an unpleasant surprise. The self-service pump is out of service. Now, with no other airports within comfortable fuel range, they'll have to find a way out of this mess. None of their options are very good. Each one adds potential risk or a long delay to this trip. Let's jump into the scenario now, take a look at the different options this pilot has, and let you decide their fate.
You picked up skiing as a winter pastime in your hometown of Red Wing, Minnesota. The bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River provide a scenic enough view, but today you and your spouse will set your sights higher and head to Wyoming for a week-long getaway. You pack up the Piper Archer and depart early Friday morning with a plan to get to Sheridan before sunset. You'll split the 650-mile journey into two legs. First, you'll fly west for about 4 hours and find somewhere to land and top off. Then it'll be a shorter leg to Sheridan with even more comfortable fuel reserve that you'll appreciate in the more remote territory. You take off, climb to 6,500 feet and head west. Every hour, your GPS reminds you to switch tanks. With a headwind averaging about 15 knots, you travel 390 miles in just shy of 4 hours and end up landing in Philip, South Dakota. You taxi up to the self-serve 100 low-lead pump, hop out, and are met with an out-of-service sign. Maybe that's why the only airplane you see on the ramp is a decrepit Antonov AN-2 that looks like it was tied down in 2004 and hasn't moved since. Inside the FBO, the airport manager informs you that the pump stopped working this morning, and for all he knows, it might not be fixed until next Monday. His call for repair services from Rapid City went to voicemail, and it's over an hour away by road. Your fuel calculations say there should be about 13 gallons usable remaining, and that's roughly what the gauges say. You dip the tanks and find 8 gallons usable in the left tank. The fuel level on the dipstick for the right tank is below the lowest mark, which is 5 gallons, but it's not dry. You figure that's at least 3 usable in the right. Rapid City is 65 miles ahead against a 10-knot headwind, so you wouldn't have a legal, let alone smart, fuel reserve. Pierre, South Dakota is 60 nautical miles in the wrong direction, but with a slight tailwind component. ForeFlight says you could get there in 30 minutes and 5.5 gallons. An eavesdropping instructor at the airport has another idea. He flies an LSA with a Rotax engine and has a few 5-gallon containers of ethanol-free MoGas in his hangar. He'll sell you 10 gallons if your Archer has the AutoFuel STC. You tell him it doesn't. No matter, he says, it's just a paper STC, and they don't actually change anything in the engine or the fuel system. And autogas mixes fine with 100 low-lead. As far as you remember from looking into the STC, that's true. It would give you the extra reserve to make the short hop to Rapid City comfortably. You don't know how you feel about using the autogas without the right paperwork, though. There's enough 100 low-lead on board to make Pierre with a legal reserve, but juggling between the left and right tanks is tricky. You say you wish you had taken the 172 with a both position, and the instructor suggests another workaround. He offers an empty container to transfer those 3 gallons to the left tank. Then again, if he has 2 empty 5-gallon containers, maybe you could borrow those and rent a car for the 3-hour round trip to Pierre to get 10 gallons of avgas. What will you do? 1. Fly to Pierre. Use the left tank alone. 2. Fly to Pierre. take off on the left tank, switch to the right tank for cruise or until it runs dry, switch back to the left for descent and landing. 3. Transfer all your fuel to the left tank. Fly to pier on the left tank. 4. Buy 10 gallons of ethanol-free autogas, then make the short flight to Rapid City to top off with 100 low lead. 5. Borrow 2 5-gallon cans, rent a car, and drive to pier to buy avgas, or wait for the pump to be fixed. Analyze the resources and make your choice.
Okay, so which option did you choose? Let's see what Paul Bertorelli would do. Paul is a well-known aviation journalist and a highly accomplished flight instructor with decades of experience.
Now listen as Paul Bertorelli shares his thoughts on this scenario.
For me, straight to choice 5, although with all the enthusiasm of a tablespoon of cod liver oil. It's good for me, I know, but I don't have to like it. But there's a virtuous point to be made here, and I will get to it a little roundabout by first dismissing the other choices. Choice 1 makes no sense. Not using fuel aboard the airplane because you're worried about the tank running dry is irrational. Just as silly as choice 3 of transferring the fuel to the fuller tank. Fuel transfer has its own risks, and the payoff here just isn't worth that or the hassle, even if you have the equipment to do it, which is unlikely. Choice 4 is out too. The Archer's Autogas STC requires significant fuel system modification ahead of the firewall, including the addition of a second fuel pump. There's a reason for that, and it's probably related to vapor lock issues. So on to choice 2. Fly to pier by launching on the fuller left tank, switching to the right and running it dry before completing the trip on the left tank. Seems like a perfectly reasonable and imminently doable strategy, so why not pick it then? The problem is no margin for error, or at least very little. Fuel exhaustion accidents used to occur at the rate of 1 a week. We've nibbled that down to twice a month or less by now, which I attribute to wider use of accurate fuel totalizers and the penetration of apps into the flight planning process, resulting in more accurate fuel awareness. All good, but the same garbage in, garbage out caution that applies to computers applies to totalizers and apps too. In this case, we're not really sure exactly how much usable fuel is aboard the airplane. It might be 3 gallons on the right side, or maybe it's a little more or a lot less. More or less might be true of the left, too. Let's pick a plausible value, say 10 gallons total fuel. ForeFlight says the Archer will need 30 minutes and 5.5 gallons to reach pier. I'm going to round that up to 6. That would leave a bare 4 gallons aboard, just enough for 30 minutes reserve at economy cruise. If there happens to be 12 gallons aboard, then it's closer to 45 minutes. That's a lot less dicey and hits my acceptable risk tolerance. But with 10 gallons, the flight becomes do or die. If we can't make it into pier for whatever reason, there are no alternates without running the airplane on fumes. And what exactly is the payoff for this minor risk? A few more hours of skiing? This is the classic fuel exhaustion setup. When the airplane comes to rest in a muddy wheat field with nothing but air in the tanks, after the unprintable expletives, the pilot will swear there was enough fuel and that the engine's burning more than it used to, or there must have been a leak. Accident investigators and FAA inspectors have heard every imaginable variation on the theme. The alluring thing about choice 2 is that it's not galactically stupid, it's just on the jiggy side of a little sporty. If I knew the airplane well, had run both tanks dry before, knew exactly what they held and how much remained in them, then I'd consider the risk acceptable in daylight and in good weather. Otherwise, no. And now, at the risk of becoming utterly insufferable, comes the high virtue the scenario begs to illustrate. Get-there-itis is a real thing in general aviation and always has been. We've done this to ourselves by implying that single-engine piston airplanes are part of a reliable transportation system. Aviation magazines used to run stories with headlines like, "We beat the airlines." But the reality is GA trips are subject to sharp limitations, and this scenario shows two of them: limited range and uncertain infrastructure. As a survival instinct, we all need to embrace this and realize that some trips won't be doable at all, we'll get tanked mid-flight, or we'll be delayed so as to miss all the fun. The way I've always thought of it is that you never, ever have to be anywhere so badly as to risk an accident. Not your sister's wedding, not a funeral, not your 30th high school reunion, and least of all, a day of skiing. In executing Choice 5, I'd first called the Peter FBO and explained my plight, just to make sure they'll pump fuel into cans. Some FBOs won't. Then I'd casually asked if there might be someone around who would bring 10 gallons of 100 low-lead over to me, either in an airplane or a car, for the appropriate amount of dead presidents, of course. Can't hurt to ask, right? It could save a couple of hours. If no, I'd rustle up the cans, find a car, and make the schlep myself. I always have a good audiobook on my iPhone for just such eventualities.
Okay, so this is a good example of why it's important to plan for all possibilities, especially on a long trip like this. Hopefully this exercise got you thinking, and that's always the goal of our VFR Mastery program. Thanks for joining me today, and safe flying.